Welcome back. This is Truth Jihad Radio. I'm Kevin Barrett, bringing you the most important truth tellers I can find to let you know what's really going on in the world. And this hour, well, one of my favorite regular radio guests is back after at least a few months away. Webster Tarpley. Webster is the man who broke the news to the world about the Bush crime family more than 20 years ago. Webster Tarpley has been instrumental in getting to the truth of 9/11. He was in the forefront of explaining that it was MIHA, made it happen on purpose, in other words, a complete inside job. He gave us a theory of state-sponsored synthetic terror in his book 9/11 Synthetic Terror. He exposed the Obama connections with the CIA and other corrupt connections long before most people had any idea just how bad that was. He's been very important in exposing the 46 drills of 9/11, the war games and drills that masked the 9/11 coup d'etat. And now he's back to give us the scoop on the kind of amazing and frightening background of Mitt Romney, who looks to be actually even a little worse than Obama, if that's possible, on the domestic front, as well as the start a war on the world front. So, boy, it's a crazy world, and if you want to know what's really happening, I guess you have to stay in touch with folks like Webster Tarpley. Welcome, Webster. It's good to have you back.
Thank you very much, Kevin. How are you?
Doing well. I see you're not taking any big breaks or vacations. You're still on top of things. You're cranking out another book. Tell us about it.
Yes, my latest book is precisely about Romney, and this is called Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America. So, Just Too Weird. You got to stop laughing so people hear the title. Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America, Polygamy, Theocracy, and Subversion. And of course, it's got racism and Freemasonry and God knows what else.
It's amazing stuff, isn't it, Webster? You know, I just learned recently that Romney's father, George Romney, who nearly won the presidency in '68, was an illegal alien.
Well, the family fled to Mexico. It's very interesting. Romney's pose is that he's a hyper-chauvinist, hyper-patriot, warmonger, right, wants to attack everybody. Russia is the main strategic foe. Surrounded by neocons, too, and we should talk about exactly who they are.
Oh, yeah.
But
the 9/11 perps.
Yes, substantially the same people, and the Iraq War and everything else. So, but his father, George Romney, was born in Mexico because in the 1880s, when the United States was enforcing laws against polygamy, they decided that they were so patriotic that they'd flee to Mexico, and they were going to stay there because they thought that polygamy was more important than the United States. So the Romney family values are very clear. Polygamy trumps the United States. So patriotic family, this is not. And then they stayed in Mexico until they were driven out by Pancho Villa. It was in the state of Chihuahua, and it's a place called Colonia Juarez and nearby. And they were driven out by Pancho Villa, and George Romney then made some very bitter remarks saying, all those people in the Mexican Revolution, they're just filled with envy. They envy us that we've done well and they haven't. It sounds very much like Romney, right? It's 47%, right? It's the family ideology.
He was ready to try and impose an austerity program on Mexico.
Who was?
Romney the elder, the grandfather. I'm just joking, but seriously, that does kind of give you a sense of their family values.
Yeah, they're very racist and very nasty. And before we leave George Romney, this is the guy with the Nash Rambler, or Rambler, and he managed to work for two of the companies that were most involved with Hitler. That was Alcoa, the aluminum company, and on that we have the testimony of Harold Ickes of the New Deal in the Roosevelt administration saying, if the United States loses World War II, we can thank the aluminum company of America because they were more interested in maintaining their Nazi cartels and production restrictions than they were in helping the U.S. get ready for World War II. And then he moved on to the Automobile Manufacturers Association, where he's working for Henry Ford, Nazi, supported Hitler, paid, helped finance Hitler, and also Alfred P. Sloan and the DuPonts, right? Irene DuPont was a big admirer of Hitler, and so forth. So he manages to combine two of the industries that were most subversive, right, most pro-fascist during World War II. And then when it came time for him to run for office, right, and for president in 1968, you look at the verbiage of George Romney running for president, and he says, "This is a moral crisis. We've got to stress the family and family values and the moral question that's facing us, and we've got too much laxity of morality. And naturally, what is this? This is the so-called moral rearmament, which probably not very well known today, but you may remember this very vapid musical comedy called Up With People. That was
very vaguely.
That was moral rearmament. It's very vapid, right? There's nothing to, it's completely bland. That was used in the Cold War, but the original of that is from about 1938 from a guy called Frank Buchman, and it was pro-Hitler. This guy Buchman, the founder of it, was a great fan of Hitler, quoted that Hitler was the best thing, the miracle of the 20th century, and so forth. So you look at this, and where have you heard that rhetoric more recently, right? You look at Paul Ryan, when he was, this interview where Ryan was, he got into a kind of a clash with this reporter in Michigan. The guy was asking him, what are you going to do about, the tremendous problems of poverty? And the response to that by Ryan was, well, we've got to give the poor discipline and order and, morality. And it's the same thing. It's the same pro-Nazi moral rearmament rhetoric. Before we leave Ryan, right, one of the things about Mormonism, and we should talk about this as a political machine, because that's what it's always been, is that this John Birch Society that people used to mock and laugh at in the 50s, 60s, 70s even, is now knocking at the door of the White House, because that's where Ryan comes from. The John Birch Society, that is an offshoot of Mormonism.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Actually, I gave a 9/11 talk at a John Birch Society chapter once. And they actually see, they're ready to embrace just about any conspiracy.
Well, they went with the palltards, right? They went with the pallbearers.
Yeah.
But that is very interesting, of course, that they regard that as anti-government, right? That's what they want to get out of it. Right?
Well, I'm not sure that they're completely wrong. I mean, if you're paranoid enough, you're probably right about something.
But let me just describe where this comes from. It's this candy maker, Robert Welch, but the main ideologue, right? Welch brought a certain amount of money, maybe not as much as they wanted, but the main inputs into the John Birch Society are all Mormon. In particular, Cleon Skousen. Cleon Skousen he was the main ideologue of extreme right-wing Mormonism in the 50s and 60s. He's a former FBI agent, and this brings me to one of my main themes. There's an FBI and CIA Mormon mafia, and this guy Cleon Skousen is a good example. He was the main ideologue of extreme right-wing Mormonism and the main ideologue of the John Birch Society overall, and it's this litany that they want the social safety net destroyed, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment benefits, food stamps. It's all communism. Communism, got to get rid of it. The other big backer of the John Birch Society is Ezra Taft Benson. He top Mormon. He became the head of the whole thing. He became the prophet from about the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s when he died. He was in the quorum of the 12, the 12 apostles since 1943. So for 50 years, he was the top boss of the Mormon Church. Ezra Taft Benson, Secretary of Agriculture for Eisenhower, and he is associated with the idea that the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King are communist, and that's all they are. It's Moscow, the KGB, and so forth. Ezra Taft Benson's son, top Mormon, went to work as an official, full-time functionary of the John Birch Society. And it's also interesting, when the time came to launch the George Wallace for President racist campaign of the American Party, right? Wallace, that Ezra Taft Benson was their first pick to become the presidential candidate. George Wallace came later, right? He was lower on the list of preferred choices. It's very interesting also that Ryan's wife, Jana, comes from the Oklahoma branch of the racist American Party. Her grandfather ran for governor of Oklahoma on the racist American Party. So you can see how tightly knit this all is and how far it goes back. But I think out of all this, right, this introductory, the main thing to get is the CIA Mormon Mafia, the FBI Mormon Mafia. And I think this puts a lot of things, including 9/11, in a new light. Right?
And wasn't Haldeman or Ehrlichman, one of those two, was a member of this Mormon Mafia, as I recall, in the Nixon administration?
I am not so sure. I think what we need is obviously a directory, because this is a very tight-knit sect, and they promote each other, and they're all mobilized for Romney. There was a worldwide Mormon Day of Prayer at the end of September to get Romney elected president, which means a day of planning. And in particular, the CIA Mormon Mafia in the federal government regards this as the culmination of their careers. I was just watching a day-long seminar here in Washington. It's where Hillary Clinton gave her speech, right? So she's going to talk about Benghazi, Libya. But one of the top honchos present is Brent Scowcroft, and I would regard him as the gray eminence of the Mormon Mafia. Now, you'll remember, Henry Kissinger dominated the State Department and the intelligence community for 2 or 3 decades. Right? Certainly the late 60s, the 70s, and well into the 80s. The word always was, and this goes back before I ever knew anything about Mormons, that whenever there was a vacancy at the State Department of the CIA, Henry Kissinger always had a candidate. Right? He had somebody that he wanted to get that post. And the right-hand man who actually did the work is General Brent Scowcroft. He was present at this thing with Hillary. Scowcroft, he's the guy who ran Bush the Elder, for example. Right? Bush the Elder, his national security director was Brent Scowcroft. He was linked to Kissinger. He was, I suppose, a rival of Haig. He goes back to Republican administrations into the 50s. And on September 11th, Mormon Brent Scowcroft was the one top official we know who was flying around in a doomsday aircraft. And according to some scenarios, if certain things had not worked out well for Bush and Cheney, which was eminently possible, Brent Scowcroft could have become the Committee of Public Safety running the United States, a Mormon.
Now, is there a kind of a connection, Webster, between these kind of extremist right-wing Mormon Mafia figures, the evangelical Christian extreme right, which has a strong place at the top of the Air Force hierarchy, which I'm told played a role in 9/11, and the Likudnik wing of the Zionists?
Well, the Mormons believe that we're looking at the end of the world. Now, this is some of the background. We're looking at the end of the world, and the second coming of Jesus Christ is going to be in Jackson County, Missouri, because this is where they think the Garden of Eden was. And this is the area that they would like very much to occupy, but they were not able to do it because there were too many Confederates. There were too many Confederate border ruffians.
Right, but I mean, they could go back there now. Do they still?
Yeah, they can, but they can't control it the way they control Utah. I mean, the degree of Mormon control in Utah is unbelievable. It is a theocracy, and we can talk a little bit about that too, because you can see this in the people that support the Romney campaign. But one of the things that Joseph Smith did, I mean, my basic thesis about Mormonism is that it is a creation of the British East India Company. It may not be totally created from the word go, but by the time Joseph Smith has been operating for 5 years or so between upstate New York and then Ohio, and then he's on his way to Missouri to see this Garden of Eden site, he is very much a satellite of the British East India Company.
Now, how did that work? How did they pick up on him, and what were their objectives?
They undoubtedly were looking at the world, right? And one of the things I quote in my book is Professor Ali Mazaheri, an Iranian who worked in Paris in the French haute étude, right? The haute étude de sciences sociales, higher education of social studies. He once told me, he said, look, the 3 miracles of the Victorian age are Karl Marx, the British agent, the Bab, the creator of Baha'i, British agent in his view, and Joseph Smith, British asset. And I would add the Taiping, the celestial kingdom of the Taiping, which was the thing that destroyed China in precisely those same years, 1840, 1850, more than anybody else, right? 30 million
dead.
The
British are creating all of these cults in the 19th century.
Right, and the British are also, I don't go much into this, and I have to reserve it for future writings, but you look at Wahhabism and Salafism, and you would have to say that the British role here is also big, and it's a lot of the time it's the British India office. Sometimes it's the British Arab Bureau, but earlier than that, before there's a British Arab Bureau of any significance, the British India office is there, and they're dealing with Muslims in India. So naturally, they pick out the backward tendencies, and they foster those. And they do the same thing with Hinduism. And they've done the same thing in this wild world of the American Protestant sects. But, again, in China, this guy Hong comes forward and says, guess what? I'm the younger brother of Jesus Christ. And very soon you have 30 million dead. That shows what Mormonism could have been.
And now, why does this benefit the British if there are these extreme kind of lunatic backward cults?
Because you're destroying the societies that you want to dominate. In other words, you want to foment backwardness. Why would the U.S. and the British support Hekmatyar in Afghanistan, or why would they support Al Qaeda? Right? They created it, and it's the most backward. Why do they do that? It's because this can be used and has been. Right? You look at what happened in Libya, what happened in Syria now. Same thing. You get the most backward tendencies, and you use those against the more advanced tendencies. And in the case of China, it's really part of the Opium Wars. In other words, the Opium War is the British attacking from the outside with opium from India, but then on the inside, they got the Taiping tearing up the society. And this is what they wanted to do with the U.S., and cut off California from the East Coast. I'll tell you about how that would work.
If somebody's promoting the most backward tendencies here in the U.S., they're doing a pretty darn good job. I'm Kevin Barrett, talking with Webster Tarpley, who's got a new book on Romney out. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Truth Jihad Radio. I'm Kevin Barrett, talking with Webster Tarpley, one of our most astute contemporary historians and commentators. His new book is called Just Too Weird: Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America, Polygamy, Theocracy, and Subversion. It's out from Progressive Press. Check it out. This is the hot book of the season, I would say, just as the Obama book was during the run-up to the last presidential election. Anybody who got their hands on that book, as I did, was in a much better position to evaluate the real potentials of an Obama presidency. In fact, Webster, if I hadn't had that book in my hands, I don't know if I could have sat down and written my Questioning the War on Terror book for the Obama voters, because it was your revelations about where Obama was coming from that clued me in to what was going to emerge from an Obama presidency. And so I was not terribly disillusioned, as so many of my friends were, thanks to you.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind. I mean, it is important to know what's coming. In the case of Romney, you can do this best by looking at this Mormon history. Let me just say, though, the Mormons are this faction of the CIA and the FBI. You were asking me before about their relations with the Israelis, right?
Yeah, the Likudnik wing. It seems like the extreme right-wing fundamentalist Christians, the Mormons, and the Zionists seem to kind of hang together and may have worked together on 9/11 to some extent.
Yeah, though we can look at it. This book is more about the long waves historically. When Joseph Smith was taken under the wing of the British, let's give Joseph Smith a few years where he was essentially a sole proprietor, an entrepreneur. He was a small town con artist, a charlatan, a mountebank. He was, and it's not just me, the state of New York branded him as an imposter and a disorderly person for ripping off farmers, telling them that there was gold buried on their property and then collecting money to go look for it, but he never found it. So that's the conviction that he has. He's got a criminal record in New York.
He's a man of his convictions.
Yes, I don't think he's a Class A felon, but at least he's got a couple of misdemeanor convictions. So he received this guy coming from the Catholic Apostolic Church of England, and that is essentially a tentacle of a church in London where the British Foreign Secretary George Canning and other top officials of the British Empire are part of the congregation, and this includes all kinds of intellectuals. You can read all about it in my book. The big input to the Mormons that they get from the British is membership. The Mormons are allowed to send a delegation to Britain in 1837. They scout the territory. Then they send another delegation, the entire leadership, the entire quorum of the 12, including Mitt Romney's great-great-grandfather, Parley Pratt, go over, and they recruit massively. In other words, by the time you get to the end of the 1840s and the 1850s, right, when the Mormons are out in Salt Lake City, where they go in the mid-1840s, it's largely British. It's English, Scottish, and Welsh. Those are the biggest groups. So you got a lot of people there who have no connection with the United States, and the goal is to create an island of British religious fanatics in Utah that will bar the Transcontinental Railroad, the Transcontinental Telegraph, and will secede at the right moment when, for example, when the Confederates are seceding, the Confederates get the ball rolling. But the idea is that the Mormons will then secede. Now, unfortunately, Brigham Young jumps the gun. He can't control himself. He wants to secede. So he's got all these British immigrants around him, and he secedes from the Union in 1857. Very little known. It's the Utah War, the Mormon War of 1857-58. It's the first secession in the United States history. It's the first civil war in U.S. history. It's the first time that an American president has said the word terrorism. We have President James Buchanan talking about the Mormons in an official proclamation saying a strange system of terrorism has been set up in Utah territory, and this is the theocracy of the Mormons, and it is a pervasive one-party state with Brigham Young as dictator. Now, the British East India Company is watching all this, and they like it, and in particular, important in setting this up, John Stuart Mill, the founder of libertarianism. Isn't it interesting? He was the head of the intelligence division of the British East India Company. He was the examiner of correspondence, meaning the CIA director for the British East India Company.
You know, I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
And you should pick up On Liberty. Uh-huh. There's a whole thing in On Liberty about how the Mormons should be left alone.
Yeah, you know, I think I do recall that, and I've read that book, but I didn't connect it with him being the head of British intelligence.
Oh, no, he is. He's the head of British intelligence. And his father was before him. In other words, James Mill, John Stuart Mill. And they're both of them are satellites of Bentham, Jeremy Bentham. And if you've ever read the biography of John Stuart Mill, he has this nervous breakdown early in his life because his education has been prescribed by Bentham, who is, of course, a monster. Mm-hmm. Right, Jeremy Bentham, the utilitarian, right, the philosophic calculus, the greatest good for the greatest number. That guy's a monster. He's just off the charts. So, with James Mill and Bentham running his education, this creates John Stuart Mill, and this is very much libertarian economics. I mean, what Ron Paul was saying is not so different from John Stuart Mill, right? And in the middle of On Liberty, we're said, don't touch the Mormons, let them have their polygamous theocracy out there in Utah. And it's very interesting because he keeps saying any woman who wants to get out of Utah can get out of there easily. And this is simply not true. And he knows it's not true because there's a whole horror literature in the 1840s and 50s and beyond about women trying to escape from Brigham Young and polygamy in the Mormon area. And one of these later on is the first of the Sherlock Holmes novels.
Yeah, exactly. I was just about to bring that up. I remember a Sherlock Holmes story involving British involvement in Mormonism.
Yeah, it's The Study in Scarlet is how to get away from this awful Brigham Young. But in the Conan Doyle is important later. And after 1870, the plan to bust up the United States is a dead letter after 1865 and certainly 1870. They can't do it anymore, so they can say what they want. But in the case of John Stuart Mill, he really likes the Mormons underneath it all. And the other person, even more important, Thomas Carlyle. Thomas Carlyle is maybe the top Victorian man of letters in terms of his influence, and he is a proto-fascist. He's looking forward to Mussolini, Hitler, and the rest of them. And he is one of Hitler's favorite authors, right? You can say Thomas Carlyle's Life of Frederick the Great probably prolonged the Second World War by a month or two, because Hitler kept thinking that he might be saved by one of his enemies dropping dead and in the same way that Carlyle describes Frederick the Great, surviving one of his wars.
Now Webster, didn't Carlyle actually mostly focus on his great man theory was not so much about a political great man, but about our artistic and literary kind of sensibility rather than politics?
Yeah, but not, because he's got Frederick the Great, and this is explicitly political. And anyway, forget that. What we have now is a very little-known, unpublished essay, which I dug up. I dug it up in a very obscure journal, at a learned journal, and it's an essay on Brigham Young. And this is really fascinating, because Carlyle is telling you about Brigham Young, that he's a dictator, he rules by charisma and consensus, he makes the trains run on time, more or less. Yeah. He's not going to allow dirty water, he's going to fix up everything so it runs well. And he's a model for the coming age. He says, the dictatorship, the theocratic dictatorship of Brigham Young in Utah fills me with envy. Because we here in Europe, we have these kings, they don't matter. He wants fascism. He's looking forward to the fascist duce, right?
Well, he needed a hero. He had that hero where the modern world lacks heroes. We've got to find heroes, and yes. Occasionally he found them in these fascist prototypes, you're right. Right,
and again, Hitler is one of Hitler's favorite writers. So this is the kind of person, and of course, Thomas Carlyle is a protege of John Stuart Mill. Without John Stuart Mill sponsoring his career, Carlyle is nobody. He's just a failed scribbler, right? He's an absolute nobody. And Carlyle is also a very good friend, at least for a time, of the preacher who runs this church in London that I was referring to before, of which the Mormons then become a tentacle, because they are, a lot of the members of one of their branches get transferred pretty much directly into the Mormons. And that's where Mitt Romney comes from. Miles P. Romney is up there in northern England, and he is recruited by the Mormon missionaries. He's British, comes over with his wife. I'm sorry, it's Miles A. is the first one to come across. Then we have Miles P. Romney. Miles P. Romney is the one who's told by Brigham Young to take lots of wives. He flees to Arizona. He flees to Mexico. Would have stayed there, but comes back. He never makes it back.
He never got renaturalized. When he fled to avoid prosecution and stayed in Mexico,
exactly.
It automatically caused his citizenship to be revoked. Right. So when he re-entered the U.S., technically he was an illegal alien and a Mexican citizen, which meant that his son, Hugh Romney, was also not an American citizen.
Well, I think it's Miles A. is the one who comes over.
Sorry,
Miles P. is the one who flees. Then we have, I guess it's Gaskell, by that point, right, the son of Miles, and then we have George, and then we have Mitt. That's pretty much the line, the way I have it in my my sort of thumbnail sketch of the family tree. Anyway, they would have stayed in Mexico. So here you see this now. They're obviously very, very sensitive on this polygamy stuff, and they say, "Oh, it's only because those awful mobs, those American mobs, were killing everybody." Well, no, it's because it's deeply rooted in the theology, and it's really that you can't hope to go to heaven unless you have at least 3 wives on earth, and that's built in.
Well, that's a lot more extreme than even the most radical Islamic polygamists. In Islam, we know that the limit, the most you are allowed to have, would be 4, but actually 1 is better. So saying you have to have at least 3, that's pretty extreme.
Well, and let's go back to Joseph Smith now. Joseph Smith undoubtedly started, this is the founder, right, the prophet. He started practicing polygamy around 1830. Nobody knows, right, because this was secret. Joseph Smith, according to the lowball estimate, is about 35 wives. Middle estimate, which is the, I think the consensus more or less is in the mid-50s, and the high estimate is about 85 wives. So Joseph Smith had lots of wives, but he went to his grave, he was killed by a mob, certainly, denying that he was a polygamist. Now, from 1830 to 1852, and this throws some light on Romney, the Mormons practiced polygamy among the elite. In other words, this was for the prophet, his advisors, the quorum of the 12, the top people. They got to practice polygamy. They were required to. Up until 1852, they always deny it. And we have some really interesting, indignant denials. How dare you? Oh, my God, polygamy, last thing in the world. Keep it away from us. In 1852, under Brigham Young, by this time they're ensconced out there in Utah, which when they got there was Mexico. It turned into the United States a couple of years later because of the Mexican War. But they're out there in Utah, and they're making their own law. They're a theocracy. Then Brigham Young says, "Surprise! We've been doing it all along, and we're doing it out here. Polygamy is us. Come on, come to me. Adeste polygamistas, come to me, O polygamous." And he builds it up, and he does it for this reason. The interesting thing is, behind these religious revelations, there's always a cynical expediency. And in the first case, it's because they're going to get mobbed, right? They're going to get massacred if they proclaim polygamy. Because what do you do when the Mormons come to your county and they set up, and then your mother, your wife, your daughter are going to be carried off into polygamy? This you don't want. By the time,
wait a minute, were they actually carrying people off, like kidnapping potential wives?
Well, the statutory rape and polygamy are inseparable, and you can see this today. The area where this culture still remains is the southern Utah-Arizona border, Hilldale, Utah, and Colorado City, Arizona. This is Warren Jeffs. Okay, this is the FLDS, Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints. They operate in this. These are twin cities on the two sides of the border. These are places where even today the mayor is a polygamist. The chief of police is a polygamist. The fire chief is a polygamist. The city council are all polygamists. And today they don't do anything to enforce it. As a matter of fact, these people like Orrin Hatch, senator from Utah, Senator Lee of Utah, this reactionary who says the child labor laws are unconstitutional, they wink at it. They say, "Oh, some great people out there." Orrin Hatch. So some of the people out there are fine. But
you're saying that there is a tendency for them to be marrying pretty young women.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the case, you can trace it back to Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, that some of these brides were 13, 14 years old. I mean, illegal today by anybody. But today in that area, it is an open secret that there's statutory rape going on a massive scale, because a lot of these brides that are recruited are they're very, very young, right? They're and this is well known, right? You can just sample the local press, right? And it's all over the place.
Don't take your teenage daughter hiking along the Utah-Arizona border. Kevin Barrett here with Webster Tarpley. We'll be right back. Truth Jihad Radio. Kevin Barrett, broadcasting from the wilds of the Wisconsin woods. I've been covering the Economic Democracy Conference in Madison, Wisconsin. It's running from yesterday through Sunday, and you can find my coverage over at noliesradio.org, the evil rival network that I occasionally work for. Fascinating stuff. It's right in line with Webster Tarpley's analysis of our economy, so check that out. Well, Webster...
Kevin, can I just ask you, we're having this conference in New York City on October 27th, and I really wish I had known about this other conference before you went, because this might have been a way to link these things up.
Yeah, I wish we should have brought you to this one. We have Ellen Brown and mostly people who are a little less hardcore truth tellers than you, but we might have been able to shoehorn you in, or they might have. Who knows?
The stuff with the toy banks. The toy banks are a blind alley. It gets you nowhere. You'll never make it with toy banks.
Yeah, but the overall analysis, which is that the usurers are siphoning off a huge amount of our labor and productivity, is undeniable, and that's what we really have to wake people up.
Yeah, but wait, the time for analysis is rapidly receding. It's time for action. In other words, what we need is a program. We got to look at those Greeks, right? That Syriza. Mm-hmm. You've got your 5-point program, right? You roll back austerity, you roll back anti-worker and anti-union laws, you increase social and political and economic democracy, you jail felon bankers, right? Accountability for these crimes, and above all, for the Greeks, it was debt moratorium within the euro. Stay in the euro, but declare a debt moratorium, and that is a winning majority plank. And with that, the Syriza people went from 4% to 27%. I hope you'll consider coming on October 27th, and especially if we can, maybe we can exchange mailing lists or something, because the people who would be interested in that, people who are going to waste their time with toy banks, I think, would be more interested with something like a fighting program of class-based programmatic demands, which is what the UFAA is for, right? October 27th. It's in the INN World Report Auditorium, 56 Walker Street. They had their 9/11 event.
Yeah, I was there at that 9/11 conference.
Exactly. Well, and that's where I think the center of gravity has shifted over into this other area. So maybe we can compare notes about that.
Sounds good. Well, actually, I think that the people at this conference in Madison would actually support all of those planks that you just proposed. Each of them has their own little area of specialty, and some of them you may feel are kind of off tangent or whatever. But I think that the overall sense of that conference that I got was that you'd be getting cheers for every one of those planks. And
what was this called again?
It's called the Economic Democracy Conference, on the web at economicdemocracyconference.org.
Okay. Just to go back, let me just remind people now. If you're interested in this Bishop Romney stuff, it's called Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America with Polygamy, Theocracy, and Subversion.
And progressive. Explain where you got the "just too weird" part of the title.
It's something you just pick up reading. I think it's about 375,000 times on the internet. It's just too weird. It's almost a marketing response when people are told about Mormonism, right? About Kolob and polytheism and things like this. Just in terms of the polygamy, though. Look. Here we have, at the end of one of my chapters, in the words of an anti-polygamy activist in Arizona, quote, "To get away with the rape of young girls, all you have to do is say you're a polygamist." And that was Warren Jeffs, who's now sitting in the federal pen. And, of course, he was scapegoated to relieve pressure on the more official Mormon side. Now, the political relevance of this. We look at Romney, right? Romney could be the president, right? People have to wake up to this, right? There's no doubt. He could win the election. According to some analyses, he will win the election. His transition director was already appointed in June, which is very early to get somebody working on the transition. But it's this guy, Mike Levitt, Leavitt, a top Mormon, someone who's in Mormons, if you're fifth or sixth generation, you're sort of up. You're getting up there, right, in terms of the antiquity of your family in Mormonism. Mike Levitt was governor of Utah. He is the guy who was in the middle of the corruption at the Salt Lake City Winter Games 2002, the ones that Romney saved. Well, what he saved was the neck of Mike Levitt, probably from indictment. Because what they were doing is going around the world in order to get the Winter Games, which the LDS Mormon bigwigs wanted. They were bribing all kinds of people. They went around to people in Africa, but Europe too, and worldwide, and they'd say, "You want to get a scholarship for your kid or your cousin or somebody? We have several $1 million of funds, and we can give you $20,000, $30,000 scholarships to Brigham Young and other fine institutions." So this is what they did. And Romney was called in from his career at Bain Capital to go in there and save Governor Mike Levitt and others from the terrible consequences of having this scandal explode. So Romney's a cover-up artist now, but Mike Levitt, top Mormon, is now the transition director. Now that means only one thing. He has the plum book. All of the political patronage posts in a Romney administration will go, on the domestic side in economics, to Mormons. So if you are not a Mormon, you can forget it. Except on the foreign policy side, if you're a neocon, you can hope for a post. Otherwise, you can forget it. And the neocons...
Now you've argued, actually, that Romney's connections with the neocons combined with what you've discussed as Joseph Smith's White Horse prophecy for world conquest make Romney a more dangerous warmonger than George W. Bush and presumably Obama. Well, what's that White Horse prophecy?
Yes, this actually came up. I've been doing a number of these programs, and a guy, I had the occasion to talk yesterday to an Irish guy living in Paris, and he said, how quickly people forget. Right? Everybody was stunned because George W. Bush was asked, "Do you talk to your father?" He said, "No, I talk to the higher father." This stuff is crazy, right? You cannot have this at the head of state level. In the case
especially with Bush, I mean, it was he's bringing in like young male prostitutes to spend the night in the White House, and then he's talking to his heavenly father. I mean,
don't ask me how many wives Romney really has, because I don't know, and I don't know where they are. But here's the thing, now with Romney, it could be worse. First of all, we have the neocons, right? The neocons have attached themselves to Romney. If you saw the Ryan-Biden debate, you will have seen Dan Sr. in the spin room, and that should be chilling. Dan Sr. was the spokesman for the unspeakable, for the U.S. occupation of Iraq during the first 2 or 3 years, when it was Jerry Bremer as proconsul and dictator wrecking Iraq, right? Wrecking the society, destroying the army, destroying the government, destroying the middle class, privatizing everything. He was the spokesman for that. So he's now the handler for Ryan. Everything that comes out of Ryan's mouth is spoon-fed by this infamous Dan Sr., and he's not the only one. Let's just go through the list. John Bolton, I'd like to talk about him if we have a couple of minutes at the end.
He's a 9/11 suspect.
He is also he's the guy who, he is the dominant figure of the Islamophobia network around Pam Geller.
Right.
And I think this is absolutely critical. You want to know who made the Islamophobia movie? The Sam Basile is a little nobody. He's a patsy. Yep. You have to look at this other character, Joseph Nasrallah, Coptic Christian. He leads you directly to the Pam Geller Islamophobia network, right? He spoke at the meeting, the outdoor rally that they had near Ground Zero on September 11th, 2010, because the Islamophobia people are the ones who did the anti-mosque campaign in Lower Manhattan, and they're the ones with these incendiary statements about savages that are up in the New York, Washington, and San Francisco subways. It's all them. It's a tiny group of people, and they're behind this movie, and they're behind the crazy guy who wants to burn the Koran in Florida. But specifically, Nasrallah leads you to this Pam Geller group, and there are a lot of people in there. But the dominant person there is John Bolton. John Bolton is likely to be Secretary of State in a Romney administration.
Oh, my God.
So we can say with a certain degree of accuracy, the Romney campaign created the Islamophobia movie. And it is important, because whatever happened in Libya is a special case, but there are 25 other countries where there were big demonstrations, from Egypt to Pakistan, countries in Europe, all around the world. Big demonstrations based on the film. Yes, on the film.
Yeah, well, these guys want a clash of civilizations, and I think that was the overriding long-term agenda of 9/11, was to produce an endless war on Islam.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
For the Zionists, primarily.
For U.S. imperialism and its various clients, I would say. But now here, let's look at the Benghazi stuff. Here is the CIA Mormon Mafia in action, and this is really interesting. You
have to keep this pretty short, because we only have about 1 minute left.
All right. Ambassador Stevens, what was he doing? Ambassador Stevens was a key guy in shipping jihadis from the Benghazi, Derna, Tobruk to Syria. That's what he was doing.
Wow.
Maybe you want to have me back next week.
I would love to. Are you available next week?
Certainly, absolutely.
You want to do same time, same channel? Or
yeah, if you send me an email reminding me. Okay, by the way, do you have a link? Can we get a link to this one?
Yeah. This is going to be up at my radio archive, which you can find by way of Truth Jihad Radio. .blogspot.com, and I'll send that.
I'd like to tell you the story, because I was just working on this afternoon about what happened in Benghazi and the CIA Mormon Mafia.
Okay.
All right.
Well, thanks. Keep up the great work, Webster. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.